is your fire generation. Show me your fire generation. Show me your fire, oh Lord. Show me your fire, oh God. More fire. More fire. More fire. More fire, man. Let the energy flow. More fire. More energy, man. More fire. More fire. More fire. Show me a fire.
Stay with us here on Talk City 91.1 FM. The program is Indaba. We're live and coming to you through StreamYard and also on YouTube, the Emancipation Support Committee's YouTube page, as well as its YouTube and Facebook. Yes. Where are my compatriots? I'm in, but I'm not seeing anybody else. Okay, something must be happening.
How are you?
Yes, very good. All right. So if Shabaka is with us, let's go. Go ahead, Shabaka.
Well, before we begin, let me just say today was we celebrated the life of who I call Auntie Pat. That's Patricia McLeod. And of course, beautiful ceremony remembering this special person. And I just wanted to say something today. When I looked at the document that they hand out at the funerals, which speaks to the life of the person, I noticed that she was born in 1942 and that she died on the 30th of March 2023. I thought it was very interesting. She is a real true member of what we would call the Black Power generation. That's those people who were born in the 1940s, who came of age in the 1960s, just around the time of independence, and who wanted more from that transition from colonialism to independence, who were prepared to declare a dividend of energy, some of them sacrificing, paying the ultimate price to see, more freedom, a higher degree of, to attain a higher degree of liberation and independence. So she was part of that generation. It's interesting, after we look at all the things that she did, with the school, with business, the African Association, the contributions to emancipation, the contributions to the Ifa tradition in Trinidad and so on, you see that all those themes of that generation of individuals, that generation we call the Black Power generation. And it's interesting that she passed on the 30th of March, which is the very day that the Vatican, announced that it was repudiating the doctrine of discovery, which is that, legal and moral framework which underpinned the very colonialism that she would have spent her life trying to undermine, to remove from the yoke of colonialism that she would have spent her life trying to move from us in so many different ways. So, she passed away on a day that sort of, speaks to the victories, of that generation of activists who sacrificed so much for the freedoms we enjoy today. So I want to say a special hello and good night to any friends and well-wishers and family of Auntie Pat, who we would have known growing up as Auntie Pat, Patricia McLeod. And also today is another special day. It's the 13th of April. In Venezuela today, they're celebrating the counter coup. 2002, on April 11th, there was a coup when Chavez was in power. 2002, the elite with the support of foreign interests, a determined effort. They overthrew Chavez, they put him in captivity, and within 2 days, the people took to the streets to return their democratically elected leader to power. So today is a special day indeed. So Vanessa, on that note, we are going to go now to deal with this issue that we touched on last week, that we didn't, that our listeners are demanding that we come back to and give some clarity to. And that's that historic announcement by the Vatican, the repudiation of these of the doctrine of discovery. What is it? So let's start with that clip that I gave you, and then I'm going to come back. And if our guests are not here, I'm going to do my best to explain what this doctrine of discovery is and how activists all over the world are dealing with it, how they're treating with this historic announcement. What do they expect? What are their hopes? And what are their reservations about what the Vatican has said? Stay with us here on Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. Let's go, Vanessa. Hello? I feel like I'm not sure if this clip is on. Vanessa? Perhaps our technicians behind the scenes can let me know if if Vanessa is hearing me. Hello? Vanessa? I'm not sure what's happening here. And I don't have a word yet from our technicians. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to call on the technicians one more time to let me know if Vanessa is hearing me, if they're playing the clip. Okay, so Mikhail Brown is hearing me. Perhaps Vanessa is not hearing me in studio. Perhaps then I will proceed with the show.
Echoing a long-standing demand by Indigenous people in Canada and a call to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission to rescind what's called the Doctrine of Discovery. Now, 8 months after the visit by Pope Francis to Canada, the Roman Catholic Church is distancing itself from papal decrees that justified colonization.
I'm just feeling incredibly proud of all those who have come before me, who have done this work.
But that response was quickly followed by apprehension.
What it fails to do still is take responsibility for the institution.
In a statement issued during the Pope's stay in hospital, the Vatican repudiated the doctrine, but didn't rescind the 15th century papal bulls.
The Catholic Church has used a lot of language that perhaps shifts responsibility.
Some say the Vatican is playing with words, claiming the doctrine wasn't part of the Church's teachings or faith.
You can't go back and say, wow, those weren't really real papal bulls, they were political statements. No, that doesn't wash.
This archbishop says the Vatican needs to replace the old doctrine with a new one.
It's a step, though, right? I mean, where we want to go is to a place where we have right relations, where Indigenous peoples are not at all marginalized in society.
I was pleased and relieved.
Phil Fontaine says the Church's declaration builds on the recent papal apologies for residential schools.
We can quibble over words, right? This is missing or that's missing. It's a pretty profound statement.
One that some say comes nearly 600 years too late. Olivia Stefanovich, CBC News, Ottawa.
Yes. So let's go through this thing gradually in time that we have. I do have my guests with me. Here's Phil, who I know was interviewed by the New York Times. Welcome to Indaba. And I think perhaps you have your wife, Sandy, with you as well.
Yeah, Sandy Bigtree. Yeah.
Sandy Bigtree. Well, welcome to Indaba, the place where knowledge grows. This is the radio program of the Emancipation Support Committee in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Phil, perhaps I should start off by just asking you about yourself and the community that you represent and the organizations that you represent. I know that you're a professor of religion at the University of Syracuse, but perhaps you could tell me more about what community you represent. I know that you represent the organization called the Indigenous Values Initiative. Tell us something quickly about that.
Yeah, so, Sandy and I are board members, founders of the Indigenous Values Initiative, and we are coming to you from Onondaga Nation territory, which is the central fire of the Haudenosaunee, or Iroquois as they're known, confederacy. And we've been working with the Haudenosaunee for over 30 years now. Sandy for far longer than me. But our organization helps educate the general public on issues like the doctrine of discovery, but also the founding principles of the Great Law of Peace and its effect on Western democracy. And we also help support the efforts of the American Indian Law Alliance, which is the lead organization of the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, which starts this weekend.
Okay, so for the benefit of our audience here, Phil, because this news has not made it to the Caribbean. This news is in Africa, this news is in Canada and the United States of America, in parts of Central and South America, but it has not been covered at all on Caribbean stations. So we need to tell our listeners, what is the doctrine of discovery? Let's start there.
Good, that's great. You want to start?
Well, as Steve Newcomb has phrased it, is the domination code, and it was issued by popes in the 15th century, and it gave a directive that any Christian discoverer traversing this planet would enter non-Christian lands, and they had the authority and obligation to seize the lands, enslave the people that were there, and Christianize them, but rarely did the Christianization process make them equals. They were always inferior to the dominating oppressive governments that came into our lands in North and South America.
Yeah, so we're talking about papal decrees that give license to colonizers to engage in genocide, slavery, and massive land expropriation across the world. Starting 1400s.
Right. It begins in the 1450s, Portuguese raiding West Africa. This is the origin of the transatlantic slave trade. And then into the Americas, right, with the Age of Discovery. So, but that's not the whole story, because these papal decrees are utilized in the U.S. Supreme Court in 1823 in a famous decision called Johnson v. McIntosh, that essentially uses the doctrine of discovery as a principle of property law. Because if you think about it, there's no property before the coming of Europeans, right? So when does land become property and have title and all those kinds of legal formulations? Well, that happens because they utilize the doctrine of discovery in this landmark decision, which is now 200 years old, right? It's this year, right?
Yeah. So I think one of the quotations I heard, so I'm glad you're touching on that. We're talking, just for the benefit of my listeners here, I just want to make it clear.
Yeah.
We're talking about papal bulls that have been brought into legal systems, perhaps in the United States, Canada, and Australia.
Right.
That are still operational today.
Yes, and also all through Latin America. I mean, and Africa. If you think about it, right, that these ideas of you could say the natural superiority of Christianity and Christian nations to inhabit lands was utilized in all of the colonial enterprises around the world, right? So
moving into New Zealand and Australia.
Right.
Right. So let me ask the question now.
Yeah.
why, with this repudiation by the Catholic Church, this should be a cause for celebration. But there's a lot of reservation in the indigenous communities across the region. What is it about the statement by the Vatican that is so uncomfortable?
Well, I mean, we wrote about it, Sandy and I, and Betty Lyons, who is in the American Indian Law Alliance.
Well, repudiation has to do with an idea. It does not have to do with actual legal systems that control you. That we're asking that the Vatican rescind their laws and their decree on non-Christian people. They're still missionizing indigenous people all over the planet and feeling the right to go in and change their cultural practices to Christian ideologies. And we need to have them stop.
Yeah. Well, I think the statement does speak to the idea of ending the colonizing mentality.
Yeah.
And speaks to that it encourages Christians to take a different approach to indigenous people. But you also made a point in your own statement where you said that the church has not taken responsibility. How do you justify that comment?
Well, there's a lot of to date, there's over 350 repudiation statements by various Christian organizations and other religious organizations. So we work with a lot of Christian groups who have repudiated the doctrine of discovery, but part of their repudiation statements have to do with taking a look at themselves and their history and what that has meant to their theological traditions, to their understandings of their relationship to God, right? So those people have a more inward looking. For example, the Episcopalians, which are a branch of the Church of England, right? They were into the colonial game very early. In 1496, Henry VII, in a charter, the Cabot Charter, issued, his decree to go and colonize North America. Well, in the Episcopal Church repudiation statement, which was the first, they say, well, this is destroying our religion, right? This is destroying us. So you don't see that kind of self-conscious awareness in the Vatican statement. I think it would be a much better statement if there was a kind of internal a turn towards, help reform the entire church, right? Based on this legacy of colonialism.
I think the Vatican statement actually goes one step further and suggests that those bulls are not the teaching of the church today, and they were never the values of the religion, and also that they were abrogated by a bull called Sibyllinus Deus in 1537.
Right.
Tell me why that is so disturbing to indigenous people.
Well, I'll tell you, because it's not true. I mean, simply put, we have 40 years of colonization before Sublimus Deus, and only a year later, that bull was essentially revoked by the conquerors themselves, by the Holy Roman Emperor. So you have a kind of emphasis on what seems to be a resolution to the bulls themselves, but then if you look at it, these colonial efforts continue. I'll give you an example. Right here in Onondaga Nation territory, the Jesuits came in 1656 with a royal decree that gave them 600 square miles of Onondaga Nation territory. And they were forced to leave 20 months later.
Yeah, the Onondaga coerced them to leave. It was a failed occupation.
Right, so they came with the deed, which is just an expression of the doctrine of discovery by this French Jesuit. Mm-hmm. And so it persisted all through the colonial period, this idea that when Christians appear in the lands of non-Christian peoples, those lands, their bodies, and all of their worldly possessions belong to the church and the sponsoring nation.
So when the Jesuits first came, they right away renamed us. They renamed our sacred game of lacrosse. It was called Dehontiquaez. They called it lacrosse to connect it to the Christian crozier of a bishop. And it became a game of good against evil. And that is not our game. Our game of lacrosse created the world we know by the creation twins that played that game. So the Jesuits recorded our stories and then taught us back in English or in French that this game was different. It was a Christian game. It was like, you know, a battle between these forces of good and evil. They renamed us. We had clan names that connect us to our special relationship to the natural world. We right away reorganized our clan families into a patriarchy, and they forced us, our clan mothers, to marry Christian men and take a vow of being subservient to them. All of this is in the Jesuit Relations. They wrote about this.
Yeah, and of course the absurd and perverse concept of renaming was very much a part of discovery. So all the islands that we live in here in the Caribbean have been renamed. We know their indigenous names now, but we would have grown up. The only island in the Caribbean that has its original name now is Haiti, which is where Africans took control of that country in a revolutionary process, and then returned the island symbolically to its original inhabitants by giving it back that name. Of course, the Europeans had called it Hispaniola and Saint-Domingue and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. One of the most disturbing documents to me, and the bulls themselves are really disturbing, but is the Requerimiento. And I just want to read one line from it, and just to get your impression, because this is how the bulls were implemented. For those of you who don't know, this is what the implementation of a Catholic bull of this doctrine of discovery was like. It's in this document called the Requerimiento, which was read to indigenous people before they were attacked viciously by conquerors. And it says, if you do not do this, that is agree to be Christian and not to resist us, and however, or resort maliciously to delay, we warn you that with the aid of God, we will enter your land against you with force, and will make war in every place and by every means we can and are able. And we will then subject you to the yoke and authority of the church and their highnesses. We will take you and your wives and children and make them slaves, and as such we will sell them and will dispose of you and them as their highnesses order. And we will take your property and will do to you all the harm and evil we can, as is done to vassals who do not obey their lord, etc., etc. Yeah. Your quick feelings on that.
Yes, that's it. I mean, that's essentially what the papal bulls say. It's it's unimaginable cruelty, essentially. I mean, that these early decades of colonialism, it's unimaginable.
The Spanish came in and they leveled the pyramids and all the sacred spaces, and they used the rubble from the pyramids to build their churches. So they reclaimed our sacred areas, our sacred places.
Yeah, well, I saw that with my own two eyes when I went to Mexico. I saw massive indigenous complexes with their you can still see the vibrant paint and all the things, and in the middle, a whole section destroyed, and the earth being used to erect these churches. Could have promoted these kinds of ideas, despite what the church is saying today. But let me open phone line 622-4911. That's the number to call if you want to be part of the show. We are here with Phil and Sandy, and they are speaking to us, representing the Mohawk Nation. Am I right?
The Onondaga Nation, which is the central fire of the Haudenosaunee. I'm a citizen of the Mohawk Nation. I grew up in the city, and so I can say things that traditional people cannot. So, and we all work along real close.
Indeed. So I'm not sure if my colleague in studio is hearing me. I think we've been having some technical difficulties, but I'd like to open the phone lines, and of course we also have.
We can take a Please do call 622-4911. People can call
So
to
we-
Talk City Studio. We're live on YouTube and Facebook. So before we go to the lotto, we can take a few calls. 622-4911, that is the number to call.
Yeah, let me just quickly summarize here. We're talking to representatives of the indigenous communities of Canada and North America, and we are talking about the response to the historic repudiation by the Catholic Church of the bulls that underpin colonialism, the ideas, legal and moral framework that underpin the genocide and enslavement of indigenous and African people over the last 600 years, and of course extended beyond Africa into Asia as well. And we are both, I think we're in concert here, welcoming this repudiation, but at the same time, looking at the details of the Vatican statement, which seems to suggest that the Church is still not ready to take full responsibility for its role in this process, yes.
I really hope that this leads to further conversation. We have been in conversation with a number of different Catholic groups. It's not Catholics we have a problem with, right? It's the structure of the institution over history that has been an issue, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that factor into this. For example, environmentalism, the issue of how we treat the earth is informed by many of these papal bulls, right? The earth as a resource only, as a kind of extractive economy. This is the beginning of the colonial period.
Of the religion's values.
Yeah, exactly.
Back, we have the Lotto Plus draw.
Okay, so while my colleague in studio has gone to the lotto, we are still live with friends on Facebook and YouTube and so on. So here's what I'm going to ask you. People like Christopher Columbus. There's a gentleman in California, a saint who's been sainted recently, Juniper Serra, and so on. Statues of that kind, places and plazas that are named in honor of people who would have represented the ideas of those bulls. Would you say that this repudiation means that the Catholic Church will now be comfortable removing with the removal of those monuments?
Absolutely.
No, what?
They wouldn't. They should be removed.
The repudiation is going to do nothing because it's just relinquishing an idea. Yeah. I mean, they have to go beyond that and rescind these documents and these oppressive structures. Columbus is the face of the doctrines of discovery. We have a Columbus statue here in Syracuse, and Mussolini paid to have it sent from Florence, Italy, during this World War II. That's how connected fascism is to this ideology.
Yeah. And how has it not been removed yet?
Because for some reason, certain Italians in our community, very powerful Italians,
businessmen,
and politically connected people don't want it to be removed.
So they sued our mayor, who was going to remove the statue.
But this is an important story because it was the Black Lives Matter movement a few years ago after George Floyd's murder. We had protests in Syracuse like there were across the country. And it was those people, African-American people, that were demanding the removal of Columbus.
Our histories are very similar, Africans and indigenous people. The way that it's taught to us, they teach us that indigenous people were subject to the encomienda system, and we were subject to slavery. The two things are exactly the same.
Right.
You're enslaved, and it's called you're called an encomendero, or you're enslaved and called a Negro. It makes no difference. And I think that we have to break down those barriers that were created deliberately to keep us separated, and to recognize that we have a similar set of oppressive structures that we need to remove. So, for example, those of us who were activists in the African community would have been with you side by side in trying to have these doctrines, the doctrine of discovery, removed. And so this means something to us very much as it does to you.
We have a Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is originally was in the War Department of the United States, and they're the ones who oversee all Indian relations in this country. And what they did in Washington, D.C. was recognize certain leaders that would be viably sound to run these Indian nations. They were replacing our traditional governments, and the people that were recognized were those who had gone through the boarding school experience, so their culture was like washed out of them. And so they were they were working with the United States. So they're in fact puppet regimes. A friend of ours just wrote a book, Peter DeRico. It's called Federal Anti-Indian Law. And it's finally been said and put in print. That's exactly what it is. But where we're located in Onondaga Nation territory, Onondaga is the only nation in the country that still operates under its pre-colonial matrilineal clan system. So we're in a very powerful nugget here, and that's why they're one of the leading voices at the UN, because they know fully what that first treaty was about and what it represented, because they never violated it in any way. And they're one of the poorest nations because they will not accept casinos, and they have a very rigorous ceremonial cycle every month.
Wow, very interesting.
We'll invite you and all your listeners to Onondaga Nation territory. We have a big conference coming up we're planning called The Religious Origins of White Supremacy. Because if you think about it, this is what we're talking about, right? The religious origins of white supremacy and the Johnson v. McIntosh decision and the doctrine of discovery. And that's December 8th through 10th. It's cold up here, so be prepared. But
now that we're back live on air, I'm going to ask you a very controversial question here.
All right.
And I need you to dig deep and answer this one for me. If you found out that there was a country that had on its coat of arms the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, what would you advise that country to do? What would you say about that coat of arms?
To investigate your origin story.
What do you think such a coat of arms would represent?
It's not where you live, right? I mean, it's not indigenous. It's not.
No, but these
comes from across the sea.
These are the ships that initiated the genocide and enslavement, decimation of the indigenous civilization. If your country puts that on their coat of arms, what does that say about that country? These ships represent the doctrine of discovery that the Catholic Church itself has just repudiated. What does it say about that country?
Under our thumb.
I'd say you need more shows like this. You need to talk a lot more about it. Yeah.
I'm not proud of that coat of arms at all.
Shabaka, thank you very much. And very good response there from Phil and Sandy. But I want to say hello and good evening to Dr. Claudius Fergus, our regular contributor and advisor to the ESC, who brings the Africa Report. Dr. Fergus.
Yes, good evening, listeners. Good evening. Of course, Sister Vanessa, great discussion going on there. And of course, all I want to say is that, Shabaka, you touched on the appropriate thing. Okay, so let's move into the Africa Report.
Tobago memorializes the
Yes, this evening we are going to talk Black Power.
In April
Black Power
1970.
in Africa.
The
This
Africa
is Black
Report
Power
once
Month,
again joined in reflection of the movement on the African continent as memorialized in song. In South Africa, the Black Power struggle against racism and colonial oppression began in earnest in the 19th century, with its first climax in the establishment of the African National Congress in 1912. Nkosi Sikelei Africa, God Bless Africa. This was a hymn composed in Kossa in 1897 by Enoch Songtonga. The song was secretly sung at African National Congress meetings since 1912, the year of their formation, and it is now the national anthem of the New South Africa. The ANC, of course, was the oldest and the main anti-apartheid organization. After the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, in which police killed 69 peaceful protesters and wounded 180 others, the ANC decided to launch a military wing called Umkhonto Wesizwe, or Spear of the Nation. To motivate the fighters, the popular battle song was composed, Amba Kala Umkhonto Wesizwe. Translated from Zulu, it means, "Go well, Spear of the Nation." One of the lines go like this: "We the people of Umkhonto are prepared to kill the Boers." Hugh Masekela, South Africa's greatest jazz musician, was the most iconic voice of the resistance in exile. In 1974, Masekela addressed the evils of the brutal system of migrant labor recruited from all over Southern Africa to work in the mines of Johannesburg. His award-winning song, Stimela, the Coltrane, magnifies the destruction of black families who were left behind when male breadwinners were taken away for 6 to 24 months to work for starvation wages.
This train carries young and old African men who are conscripted to come and work on contract in the gold and mineral mines of Johannesburg. 16 hours or more a day for almost no pay. Deep down in the belly of the earth, when they are digging and drilling for that shiny, mighty, evasive stone.
The Black consciousness movement took off in early 1970s, led mainly by university students. But in 1976, Trinidad and Tobago's College Revolutionaries, the National Organization of Revolutionary Students, or NOS, had its mirror reflection in South Africa. Teenage students across South Africa launched their own public resistance to Afrikaans, the language of the Boers. The Boers, now called Afrikaners, were co-colonizers with the British. Starting with 15,000 marchers, the movement spread all over South Africa after the police killed 3 of the original protesters. By the end of the resistance, at least 575 students were murdered by police, and that's only the government's figure, with another 2,300 wounded. In memorializing this event, Masekela composed the song Soweto Blues. This version is performed by Marion Makeba, who was married to Masekela from 1964 to 1966. Black consciousness was South Africa's equivalent of Black Power. Its principal ideologue was Steve Biko, a university student, like most of the Black Power leaders of Trinidad and Tobago. Steve Biko wrote, "Merely by describing yourself as black, you have started on a road towards emancipation. You have committed yourself to fight against all forces that seek to use your blackness as a stamp that marks you out as a subservient being. Black people, real black people, are those who can manage to hold their heads high in defiance rather than willingly surrender their souls to the white man. The interrelationship between the consciousness of the self and the emancipatory program is of paramount importance." The murder of Steve Biko in 1977 galvanized artists from independent Africa, the African diaspora, and even sympathetic whites. This tribute to Biko was performed by English musician Peter Gabriel in 1980. He sang, "You can blow out a candle, but you can't blow out a fire. Once the flames begin to catch, the wind will blow it higher." In the Caribbean, many Jamaican warriors of reggae did not fail to register their protest songs. Here is a sample of Tapper Zuki's tribute to Steve Biko. Fela Anikulapo Kuti was one of the greatest Pan-African civil rights activists of the 20th century, the pioneer high-life composer and artist. After he met with Black Panther members in 1969, Fela transitioned from singing love songs to conscious lyrics and added the Anikulapo to his name. In Yoruba, Anikulapo means one who has captured death and put it in his pouch. The name conveys a sense of his invincibility, but equally that he was not afraid of death from the forces that his songs disturbed. One of Nigeria's leading human rights lawyer and activist, Femi Falana, was the keynote speaker at the annual commemoration of Fela Kuti in 2021. These are excerpts from his presentation. Falana explained how Fela Kuti largely influenced the enactment of law to prohibit torture of a citizen in police custody in Nigeria. Another important constitutional reform arose from Fela's battle with government for compensation after soldiers burned his houses down in the Kalakuta Republic. Fela was a friend of Thomas Sankara, president of Burkina Faso, the only leader besides Maurice Bishop, who consolidated the ideals of the Black Power movement in 4 years of revolutionary development in Burkina Faso. Falana reminded the audience of this relationship.
Fela visited Sankara. Both of us were supposed to be guests in July 1987, but my passport was seized by the State Security Service. But Fela was allowed to go, and Fela came back with fond memories that no leader, since the days of Nkrumah, no leader had moved Africa, no leader had a better vision than Sankara. And Sankara was talking of revolution. In 4 years, that poor country, landlocked country, never took a loan. It was offered, the country was offered loans. And Sankara said, no, we don't need your loans. Our people are ready to develop our country.
After the assassination of Sankara, Fela was again invited to Burkina Faso by Blaise Compaoré, the man who was widely believed even then to have killed Sankara.
After the assassination of Sankara, Compaoré invited Fela, and Fela said he was going to go. I said, how can you go? He said, no, Femi, the man will regret inviting me. And Fela went. And Fela had composed a song, Underground System, how they kill Sankara. Underground system is their lives. One African leader, they
Okay, the idea of the presentation was to give you a synopsis of the reverberations of the Black Power movement in Africa with a selection of 3 countries, South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria, but through song. And so you found that in every context, you know, I interjected some lyrics that captured the moment and in real time. So basically, we have some of the key figures, and we are going to continue that discussion next week with some more details on some personalities. So, yes, Vanessa?
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Fergus. Lost you for a minute there, but you're back and on track and live on Talk City reverberations of the Black Power movement in South Africa, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria. We certainly look forward to that part two of that discussion. Let's rejoin Shabaka Kambon, and we should be bringing in Reverend Kwame Kamal at this time, as well as a guest to stay with us.
And of course, we still have our guests from abroad. While we await Brother Kamal, there's a comment here on our Facebook page which says that the Vatican is reluctant to repudiate this decree, or meaning these decrees, because it will open them up to lawsuits of reparations and reclamations of lands and properties and other ill-gotten gains of colonization. What say you, Phil and Sandy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're in real trouble here. You know, there was a report released in Baltimore, I think, just last week, that over 600 children had been abused over a 70-year period or something like that by about 150 priests in that area. And so yeah, they're facing a lot of legal trouble, not just from the doctrine of discovery, but and also, frankly, they're one of the largest landowners in the world. So yes, it will open them up to a lot of that. But it has to happen. You know, it has to happen. And I think Catholics all over the world really know that they have to examine this history and they have to dig into it more.
The church came in and prohibited us from doing our ceremonies and disconnected our link to the world. They did not conquer us, however, because we kept those traditions alive, and we're still trying to take control of our nations right now from the BIA governments that are still oppressing us in many ways. It's the bigger picture is that this disconnection from the land has caused the environmental cataclysmic future that we now face. And if we don't address this and change our relationship with the natural world, we need to change our values if we are to survive as human beings. And the Vatican, you know, has got to relinquish this hold that God is outside of this world in some ascended cloud. We have to reconnect to the power of this regenerative force that sustains our lives and all lives that we share on this earth.
Indeed. And let me just bring our guest. I want to introduce you to the gentleman who just led the last segment of the show. That's the former chair of the Department of History at the University of West Indies, Dr. Claudius Fergus. I don't know if the technical staff could bring him back forward. Dr. Fergus?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask a question to our guest. Now, at the time that the earliest bulls were promulgated, the religion, there was only one religion throughout Europe, and that was Roman Catholicism. So that the issue with religion would have transcended all of the empires at the time, even up to the Reformation. You would have had the contestation of what was then called prior discovery to possession, so that legitimacy was based not on the prior discovery of the Portuguese and the Spaniards, but an actual possession of the lands. What I would like to ask is, to what extent because to some extent it meant that the claim of Europeans as the new Israelites to whom God had given, you know, the world as a gift, would have permeated all the European imperialist thought at the time. So the question is, to what extent did these bulls affect the Protestant nations? Were they riding on these as an original, legitimate proclamation or decree coming out from that monopolistic, hegemonic religion at the time? to what extent could you therefore bring in the Protestant nations into into this dialogue as well?
It's a good question. You know, that my previous example of Britain or the UK, right? Originally, England signed on to the essentially used the papal bulls by Henry VII, who was Catholic, right? But then in the 16th century, his son Henry VIII and Elizabeth I, they were Protestant, the first Protestant rulers of that country. Well, things didn't change. You know, the same sort of colonial force was utilized in letters of patent for the Virginia colonies, for example, or the Pilgrims that came over. So all those efforts were still informed by these Catholic documents, right? Even though they're transitioning from Catholicism into Protestantism or the Church of England. But also the wealth, because the colonial project was all about extracting riches from these colonial lands, and all the wealth that came back into the Vatican caused a lot of upheaval in Europe, particularly between Northern Europe and the Mediterranean world, which resulted in more Protestant upheavals, right? So you could say that these colonial projects fostered a kind of Protestantism particularly in the Northern European states. But it's a complicated map. It's not a straightforward thing. I will say though that in 1452, 53, in 1453 is the fall of Constantinople by the Muslims, by Muslim conquerors. And from that point forward, it was under Muslim control. And so the Vatican is looking at the incursions of Muslims from their point of view into their world, and they have to go on an exploration to enrich themselves. And so essentially, the Age of Discovery is really a continuation of the Crusades, right? Does that make sense?
One quick point before we run out of time. An observation of mine years ago, when I first went to England to do some research, I was very surprised to see the crest with the French. I knew they had fought the French during the French Revolution, and yet they maintained the French. But the point I want to make is this: the logo is Dieu et mon droit, God and my right. Now, so you see that the continuation of this sort of scriptural affirmation to imperialism, and this thing is entrenched within the monarchical crest, which means the national emblem of England itself, they still carry this logo, claiming in a sense, doctrine of discovery.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. I wonder how Charles is going to deal with this, right? The new monarch here.
So
that's left to be seen, huh?
Yeah. So the question now, Phil and Sandy here is, what next steps for the indigenous people? Are they going to continue to call for the rescinding of the bulls, or is there a general consensus that the repudiation is enough?
Oh no, not at all. It's just a start, and people we know have been working 30, 40 years just to get to the start of this. There have been people a lot grayer than us that have been working on this issue for many decades, and to get to this point is quite an accomplishment. I don't want to belittle that at all, but there's so much more to be done, and that has to do, from our point of view, has to do with education, These kinds of events, educational events through the United Nations, we're having a series of panel discussions next week at the UN. And just a whole variety of collaborations across the world, around the world that can help.
It was only in 2007 that the UN finally acknowledged indigenous people as being people. Prior to that, they were referred to as populations, which is the same word they used to refer to reindeer in Norway.
Oh my goodness. Look into that. But let me ask one final question here, which is has to do with the solutions now to the problem. So you're having these conferences and so on. What kind of statement would you like us to put forward here in the Caribbean? We want to issue our own statement tomorrow. What would you like to see us in that statement?
Well, I mean, you were at the front lines of all this. I mean, we were talking about Columbus. He was never in North America, and yet he's a symbol of the doctrine of discovery in virtually every city in the United States. But you were actually there. You are actually in the front edge of this, and I think that's a very powerful position to be in, to repudiate these doctrines and to examine that history from a critical perspective, right? And also, frankly, you're surrounded by water, and it's not going to go down any, right? These are urgent issues of our time too. So I think connecting the dots between environmental collapse, this legacy of colonialism, and I think that's really where we have to go.
Our identity as human beings comes from the earth. Our languages stem from the earth, our music, all of it comes from our interaction with the natural world. And these bulls, made sure to disconnect all human beings.
Indeed. So reconnection is the theme. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much, Sandy. We want to wish you all the best. I received the notices about your upcoming events. We're going to see if we can make it to one, perhaps.
That'd be great.
Okay.
All right.
Yes, Vanessa, I know it's 9 o'clock and we're wrapping up. Dr. Fergus, do you want to have the last word?
Well, I think we can wrap up now.
Indeed.
The excellent discussion. I think we definitely need to continue, not necessarily with the same guest, but we need to carry forward, this conversation. Even if not next week, but we do need to continue this discussion.
Indeed, of course. Okay, so on that note, then, I want to say a good night to all our listeners. This has been another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. It's been a pleasure for myself, Shabaka Cambon, and Vanessa Herbert in studio, and Dr. Claudius Fergus as well, to be here with you tonight. We look forward to you joining us again next week for another edition of Indaba. Thank you.